Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how I built this coffee table for my parents' living room. Now, as you can see, this is obviously a round coffee table, but you could build this same design as a square coffee table if you preferred, but I prefer round coffee tables because I'm less likely, obviously, to jab my knee into the corner when I'm walking around it. But I will say that circles are definitely not my favorite thing to cut out with tabletops, so it did require a little bit of patience and a lot of sanding. So there is that. All in all though, this build was pretty simple and I'm excited to share it with you. So if you're ready to see how it all came together, let's go. This video was sponsored by my friends at Craig. You guys know that I love Craig for their amazing tools, but I also love that they've packed their website full of free building plans, including the one for this table. I'll leave a link in the description below for you to grab the free plans for this project on craigtool.com, and while you're there, be sure to check out hundreds of other plans and resources to get building with Craig. When building tables, most of the time, I like to start with the top and then build the base to fit it. I built this entire project using basic construction lumber to keep costs low, and also because I don't have a great source for 2x material in my area for anything other than pine. I used 2x6s for the top because these were spruce and everything wider than a 2x6 was pine. I personally like spruce better than pine, so that's what I went with. But if I were to do this over, I would definitely just use the wider boards for fewer glue joints. Now, normally I would plane my boards first, but my mom's style is a little more rustic than mine, so I don't think that the time and effort in planing them would be very much appreciated in the end result, so I just didn't bother with it. But I did make sure to pick the straightest, flattest boards that I could find in the store, so at least I was starting off with some decent surfaces. I trimmed my boards down to about 42 inches long, then squared off the edges on the table saw on both sides of each board. Now this isn't necessary, but since these 2x boards come with rounded edges, squaring them off first makes for cleaner glue ups. Then it was time to glue. Now, I hate glue ups. They're time consuming, messy, and incredibly stressful, but they're just part of the process sometimes. So to make this part easier, I like to glue up my large panels in small sections. So first, I glued up the middle two boards. I let these set in the clamps for about an hour, and then I added another board on each side. Then I repeated that until I had all 8 boards glued together, and I left that clamped overnight. Now I know that I'm supposed to avoid using lumber with the pith, and you can see clearly that every board I purchased was like that. I actually didn't even notice it until I got home and cut them. Now I've heard from various sources that these are garbage boards and they'll move unpredictably, so you should never use them, but I'm a rebel. And while that may be true, I'm taking my chances here because if it warps later, I'll just make a new top at that point. No big deal, and if it doesn't, then I'll just continue on as usual until my mom inevitably decides that she's tired of this one and wants a new coffee table anyway. No harm, no foul. So I guess if I were to advise you, I would advise you not to use the pith, but clearly I'm using the pith and I'm really not that worried about it. So just take that with a grain of salt. I came back the next day after the glue was dry and cut my circle out. I flipped the top upside down on my workbench on some scrap blocks and measured and marked the center. I used a router with a straight bit to cut out my circle top, but you could definitely just trace the circle and use a jigsaw or a bandsaw to cut it out instead. Okay, so this is my homemade circle jig. It's literally just a piece of scrap 1/4-inch plywood. I made this a while back, I think last year when I built my round coffee tables. So basically these screw holes right here, that is this pattern. So I'm just gonna take this clear plastic piece off, then put this in between the clear plastic piece and my router, screw it back together so that this is screwed to the jig. And then I'm gonna drill a hole so that it's about 20 inches from the edge of the router bit, so that way when I make my circle, the overall size will be about 40 inches in diameter. I don't really love the router method, but it does ensure a near perfect circle, so there are pros and cons. I made this circle jig last year from this scrap piece of 1/4-inch plywood. It takes about 2 minutes to make and is a great jig to have in the shop. I simply screwed this to my router, then measured from the bit and drilled a hole about 20 inches from it on the jig. Then I used that same drill bit to drill about an inch deep into the center of the top panel through the hole on the jig. I adjusted my router depth to just about 1/8 of an inch deep and cut my first pass of my circle. After every rotation, I adjusted the router bit depth about 1/8 of an inch deeper and used a vacuum to clean up all the debris. I did this about 8 times, then I switched gears. I've made enough passes here that we're about 1 inch deep, so I still have a 1/2 inch to cut through. I don't like using the router. It makes me extremely nervous. It is definitely not my favorite tool. So I've got my basic outline here, and since this is only a 1/2 inch thick down here at the bottom, I'm going to take my jigsaw and cut out all of this material on the outside. Then I can either take the router with the same bit and keep cutting, but I can cut more material, or I can take the flush cut bit and go around. Did you pick up yet that routers are not my favorite tool in the world? To save a little time and some of what was left of my nerves at this point, I went ahead and cut through the rest of the material with a jigsaw. Then I could just make 2 more quick passes to clean up the edges and be done with the router. Once this was cut out completely, I proceeded to sanding. I sanded the bottom, I sanded the top, I sanded the edges. I sanded for a good while until all the glue squeeze out was gone, the surface was as flat as possible, and all the seams were flush. Not gonna lie, it was a lot of sanding. But after it was sanded, the project is basically over because building the base of this table is a breeze. My mom ordered this set of table legs from the Carolina Leg Company, and I'll link the exact ones that we used here in the video description. But there are tons of pre-made table legs that you can find online in different styles and sizes, so these are just one of many options. These particular legs were 3.5 inches square, so I used 2x4s for the X braces between them since those are also 3.5 inches wide. Well, they were 3.5 inches wide before I squared the edges. Just like for the top, I squared the edges of these 2x4s as well because I just don't really like rounded corners. So they actually ended up being about 3 inches wide, which was still fine. I cut 2 long pieces and 4 short pieces to make 2 identical X's, one for the top and one for the bottom. I brought up my Craig 720 pocket hole jig and drilled 1.5 inch pocket holes into the ends of all of these boards. Then to assemble, I marked the center of the edge of the long board and the center of the end of the short boards. Then I just lined up these marks and screwed them together using 2.5 inch pocket hole screws. I did this twice to make 2 identical sized X frames. Then I simply screwed these X's into the legs at each end. I made sure that all of the legs were right side up when attaching so that I didn't accidentally get one like upside down or something. I also made sure to face the pocket holes on the top X towards the top and the pocket holes on the bottom X towards the bottom so that none of them will be seen in the finished project. Now all that was left was attaching the base to the top. Because all of this is solid wood, it all has the potential to move, so there are tons of ways to attach the top to allow for wood movement. In my last 2 videos, I show using figure 8 fasteners, and that's an option as well as using Z-clips. But another even simpler option is just to drill some oversized holes through the base but not into the top. Then use screws with washers through these holes to secure. Drilling large holes in the base piece allows the screw to move within the hole as the top expands and contracts. I attach the base to the top in the center and then also at each end just behind the table legs. And that completed the building part of the project. Now all that was left was just adding a little stain and some poly. I stained the base with Varathane Ebony and the top with Minwax Provincial. Then I sealed the top with Minwax Polycrylic. I sealed the top and the bottom sides of the top panel with poly to help keep it as stable as possible. And now it's ready for Mom and Dad's living room. This was a really fun and simple build, and I'm excited to be sharing the free plans for it over on craigtool.com. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it come together, and if you make one for yourself, do yourself a favor and use wider boards for the top to save on glue up time and stress. If you can't wait to see what's next, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on all of the latest projects and plans. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!